We're going to begin today with a little bit different order with Mrs. Sona Stepanian. Our next speaker is an independent curator based in Stockholm. Between 2016 and 2018, she was a curator of the Armenian Art Foundation, and before that, at the Educational Department of the Garage Museum of Contemporary Art in Moscow. Currently, Sona Stepanian has been independently collaborating and consulting for international awards and foundations such as the Hannah-Atkins Foundation, Arco Madrid Video Art Production Award, and Harsardinian Minasian Foundation Artistic Production Award in 2019, the White Room Foundation, Open Calls, and others. Please welcome now Ms. Sona Stepanian. Sonia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I hope you hear me well. Please let me know if there will be any technical problems.
Yes, so that we hear you very well, Sona.
Great. It's a pleasure to participate in this conference. And I would like to thank very much the Cyprus Chamber of Fine Arts and you, Rebecca, for the invitation and organization of this in these pandemic times. And coming from a curatorial background, I hope this presentation will be a visual reference to my observations and research on the history of contemporary Armenian art, as well as conversations with scholars of Armenian art, such as Ruben Arefshatian and Yeva Khachatryan and Nazaret Karoyan and Adelina Juberian von Fürstenberg, and many other people who were very kind to share their knowledge and who are contributing still to the Armenian contemporary art, and with whom I met during my research period there. And I hope this talk will reveal the changes of political regimes and society's mood and turbulence through the works of Armenian artists from 1987 to 2018. So basically departing from the perestroika to the formation of the national state and the Velvet Revolution of 2018. Let me share my screen, please. And yes, and I'd like to start the presentation with setting a vocabulary. When, as it says, the presentation is called an artistic gesture as a way of protest. But what do I mean when speaking of artistic gesture? One of the definitions of the word gesture is an act designed for an external effect. Any artistic practice on a way is also designed to be seen by the audience. So it is natural that the work of the artist who doesn't so much master or craft, whose works we'll see during this presentation, and instead more practice and live, is called primarily an act, and therefore an artistic gesture. So when making an artistic gesture, the artist consciously presents himself toward the public. An artistic gesture is necessarily thoughtful, sometimes suffered, and strategically verified symbolic gesture at the same time. Because of it, it belongs to the cultural field, although carrying potentiality and inspiration for the future changes. Armenia, which was a part of Soviet, was initially considered one of the most liberal and open-minded of the Soviet former republics. Or we might say that the central power systems in Moscow were obliged to tolerate the liberal habits of its thousand periphery in order to avoid the accumulation of tensions within society that started in late 60s and went later. There was more or less constant import of information to Armenia via their diasporic connections worldwide. Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, as Arman Grigorian, one of the artists you see on this picture, remembers, became one of the most important centers, echoing the hippie movement, which by that time penetrated the Soviet Union with rock music and alternative art. From the 80s, within the parallel to the existing institutional systems, another situation was created and developed by the artists who considered themselves to be nonconformists. Contemporary art emergence and development was already a gesture of protest against the outdated canons of art academy and the socialist realism art of the Soviet in general and Soviet Armenia in particular. So the Romantic 80s were dominated by perestroika, a political movement for reformation within the Communist Party, associated mostly with the Mikhail Gorbachev, its leader, and his openness policy. So perestroika brought disobedience to the official structures and brought together visual artists, poets, musicians who actively published manifestos and released self-published books and zines. The first representatives of what later would be called contemporary Armenian art were allowed to exhibit their works at the third floor of the Artists' Union. So the new political situation played a big role in letting the voice to the younger generation of artists. Usually the conferences were held on that third floor movement. So third floor of the Union of Artists. So you can imagine when giving a voice, you protect yourself by letting these artists speak, but still on the very top of the building where you just present non-artistic practices usually. So on this picture, on this slide, we see the documentation of the first performance of the third floor movement. So that was called Hail to the Union of Artists from the Other World. So while walking slowly through the halls of the Artists Union to the third floor, the scenography of the performance couldn't make the audience not to notice the dichotomy of the time through comparison the official portraits and paintings on the background and the boldness and audacity of the performance. A few more slides with the representatives of the third floor movement. But the reaction of the local audience to these exhibitions and that kind of art in general wasn't positive. The aesthetics of this type of art was entirely new, and it became the first limitation for appreciation. And the second one was its content, which at the first glance was not relevant to the reality. So belonging to the third floor movement, among others, were artists like Karine Matsakyan, Ashot Ashot, Ruben Grigoryan, Armen Petrosyan, Arshak Nazaryan, and many others, including curator Nazaret Karoyan. The appearance of the new alternative possibilities created other kind of artists as well who were working independently, not within the collectives. One of them is Hamlet Hovsepian, one of the most significant figures of the Armenian contemporary art scene and pioneer of the video art in the Caucasus area. In his works, Hovsepian emphasized emptiness as a possibility of critique on the passivity of society. Most of Hovsepian's films are recording of very simple, ordinary, and seemingly meaningless gestures and human actions, such as yawing, as we see on this slide, head washing, nails nibbling. I would like to show you a short fragment of the yawing video piece. So his approach was raw, direct, and often humorous. By focusing on the basic actions of daily life, Hovsepian searched for an estrogen identity beyond the sphere of social and political life. And it is impossible not to draw a parallel with the media that the artist uses, which is film and video, with the main source of brainwashing in the Soviets, which is TV. Let's continue with the presentation. We're moving forward to the 19th, when the collapse of the Soviet regime in 1991 and emergence of all that independent artistic practices actually actualized the urgent need for new institutions that would perceive, present, and investigate the dynamics of contemporary art trends. The so-called ambitious 90s formed the first institutional agenda. During that period, some short-lived institutions were created and directed again by the artists and provided an equal and open field for independent art. The galleries and cultural centers were established later. One of them is High Art Cultural Center, you see on your right on the screen, that keeps working as a art institution, and that was hosting one of the first triennials of contemporary art in Armenia. And on your left, you see the In Vitro magazine that is not publishing anymore, but when published, it was one of the central meeting points for the written word about contemporary art. Another center for experiments was, from its foundation in 1992, became a center point for meetings for the new generations and new discourse appearance. So the Armenian Center for Contemporary Experimental Art that exists and works still represented for many years the Armenian pavilion at the Venice Biennale and evoked controversial reactions in social thinking and local institutional network. At the same time, other institutions developed, also driven by artists in response to the constant economic and social difficulties of the young and not always coping country. In 1998, 10 years after the city of Gyumri was nearly destroyed by a devastating earthquake, the first biennial of contemporary art was established by the artists from Gyumri. So the biennials were based on very different concepts and structural models, but always in tight collaboration with an international and local artistic scenes. Here we see the documentation from the very first biennial opening and the performance by two artists, Viktor Evshatian and Ruben Grigoryan. And here we see the work by Mika Vatinyan from the 8th edition of the Gyumri Biennale. It is called Singing Fountain Brought to the Exhibition Space. And in this piece, Vatinyan points at public ritual in the everyday life of the city. This water spectacle that attracts hundreds of spectators every day is accompanied by motley soundtracks from operas, ballets, and local classical and pop music, combined with sometimes with very nationalistic songs. So by putting these videos in the exhibition space, Vatinyan invited visitors to experience the spectatorship of both events, mass entertainment such as singing fountains as a certain symbol of constantly erecting state that relies on the ideology of stability, and the big events, major events in art fields such as biennales and fairs. As different they both provide a false hope for actual developments in a certain sphere, social and cultural in our case. The ACT group, whose documentation of performance we see right now, was perhaps one of the most socially oriented. In 1995, when the entire republic was particularly saturated with politically and socially oriented meetings, the art group held an art demonstration following all the formalities of the demonstration, such as holding banners, whose aim was artistically to confuse a crowd that had already become used to the very ordinary slogans. The demonstration took place in Yerevan, and the group emerged proposing slogans such as free art, free culture, free creativity, art referendum, no art inspection, and many others that were against instrumentalization of art as an economic and political product oriented towards filling cultural gap. Some more documentations, and one of the leading artists of that group, David Karayan, standing in the window of the Center of Contemporary Experimental Art that I show you a few slides before. Moving to the late 90s, the younger generation began to explore and develop new tendencies and discourse. Artists such Vahara Maghasian, David Karayan, Maher Azatian, Diana Hakopian, Sona Abgarian, Tigran Khachaturian, Edgar Amroyan, and many, many others. Their art underlined individualism as a reaction to the Soviet collective consciousness. Some artists took this as an opportunity to raise new to Armenia questions, such as, for example, gender issues, which was raised by Sona Abgarian in many of her paintings and performances. On those reproductions, artists concentrate in addition to the issues of the lonely individual frustrated by ideological and social pressures, as seen in the context of global changes in the micro-world model and in the age of collapse of illusions, and also re-examining the meaning of art and its position in the society. So let's go back to this work. I wanted to bring an example to explain you one of the paintings we see. Edgar Amroyan, a painter whose work on the right is called Yeraz, which translates from Armenian as a dream, depicts the destroyed car from the Yeraz factory that you might find currently also abandoned in the Armenian landscapes. So this series was called Edgar's Dreams, and presented paintings of these cars, abandoned cars all over Armenia. So the late and very individualistic 90s were followed by the street actionism of the 2000s, which burst of solidarity and united artists in activism and contributed to the emergence of the Armenian public art and street art. Art Laboratory Collective, again, we are back into the collective mode, their aim was to politicize the public space and existing perspective of political complaint. The Art Lab Collective was formed and became one of the active representatives of participatory art in Armenia, and it consisted of the artists whose works we've seen a bit earlier, like Edgar Amroyan, for example. This is a documentation from one of the Art Laboratory Collective exhibitions. The exhibitions that they ran presented the environment of that time, widespread wood buying, usually 5,000 Armenian drams, the currency you see on the left, was used to buy the votes of the citizens. And the portrait of classical Armenian poet Tumanyan is depicted on that banknote. That's why as a place for the exhibition, they have chosen Tumanyan's the writer's museum. So the exhibition's exponents, it displayed among the museum collection series of video arts, items of vote buying process, and some interviews, as well as some food and other widely spread vote buying items that were used during the election days. Of course, this exhibition was not really greeted by the public as something very successful. I cannot mentioning the exhibition that I curated and the frustration and apathy that were also present in the history of this artistic struggle, the power nap of 2010s, that became a result of a stagnation caused by despair over the unchanging power systems and art institutions, and that suppressed actually freedom of the artist and almost didn't show them within the official structures. The exhibition brought together artists whose practices often withdrew from the publicity to the seclusive studios, and particularly kind of a hideaways where a look into the past could establish inner dialogue and reintegrate the artist with the present. This symbolic power nap was a short stop meant to replenish the strength to carry on for the future changes and future gestures. So among the participants were artists from former ACT group, from former Art Laboratory, and needless to I would like to mention that the exhibition came possible because of the help again of the artist, one of the members of the third floor, Arman Grigoryan, and his care for the future gestures. A few works from the period that I call a power nap within my research, that were not presented in the exhibition, but still in this curatorial approach, I connect them to that period. So the Velvet Revolution of Love and Solidarity, which took place in May 2018 as a continuation of the power nap, seemed to have been anticipated by the artist much before. Here you see a painting by Arman Grigoryan, whom I mentioned, from 1994. Proving it again that the creative thought of an art is often one step ahead of the real life challenges. One of the features of that revolution, when thinking from that period, was that from the very first days, it succeeded in erasing the barriers between the artistic and official, governmental, when each word from the political stage was immediately reinterpreted in the artistic context, and politicians used the vocabulary that had been developed in artistic studios. it seemed that finally the space was established that was dialogic in contrast to the hierarchical spaces that were before, and that would make an artist as a marginal element. So here we see the artist in the very beginning of the revolution, the Velvet Revolution movement, holding this banner that says a revolution of solidarity and love, that was used later as an official motto by Nikol Pashinyan, the leader of that revolution and current prime minister of Armenia, whose portrait you see on the left, the graffiti done by Art Laboratory Collective in late 2000s. So I should have been finished, like, end my speech by this moment, yes? But after the recent brutal war between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the territories of Nagorno-Karabakh in December 2010, I just can't help but remember this photo where artists again are protesting against the war in early 90s during the first war over Nagorno-Karabakh, unrecognized Nagorno-Karabakh territories, demanding to give the territories and leave it for the artists. In conclusion, I would say that the trends in the current cultural mindset were often first reflected in the visual arts, which was perhaps the most independent from other cultural fields, such as literature, theater, and cinema. One way or another, the artistic activity was provoked by political and cultural realities, often being an instant reaction to and a way to stay in between the reality and illusory life. And thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to for your questions and a discussion. And please, yeah, let me know if I need to repeat anything from what I said before. Yes, I'm very open to the further.
Thank you so much, Sonia.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.
If you have a certain links that you would like to share with our audience, yes, please go ahead. We will. So people can see more of your work and your curatorial work.
Thank you very much. I just would add that I think I didn't mention in the beginning that my interest in particular was to focus mostly on the history of contemporary art and the artistic works as a thread line in my presentation.
Right. I find amazing the concept of the symbolism in the power map is quite very striking, a very excellent exhibition. Thank you. We haven't had any questions. I don't know if any of you would like to raise your hand and ask Ms. Sonia something. We can unmute you. Can you see the attendance, please? Okay, Mrs. Georgia Michailidis, if you can open her mic. Okay, Georgia, you're on.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you very much for the very enlightening lecture. I would like to ask a question. Do most of the artists in Armenia, are most of them involved in collective work? I'm talking about the contemporary artists, or other artists who are also involved in individualistic work?
Thank you very much for your question. Of course, there are many kind of artistic practices presented within Armenia, and there are artists who work individually as well. I try to focus to keep this line of contrast between individual and collective work within Armenian contemporary art history. And that's why it might seem that most of them are working collectively, but not. There are many artists who work individually, whose works I didn't have chance to show just because of the topic of this presentation. And there are many artists who work actually within the Armenian discourse, but who do not live in Armenia, whose works I also couldn't show because of the topic of this presentation, who are doing great job also working individually worldwide.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If you're interested in any kind of artistic practices, I would love, yes, after the conference to share some other knowledge with you and send you maybe some links to the artists.
That'd be very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sonia, for this, for your presentation. Next, we have Mr. Mosira, a performer and writer working across a multiplicity of art and design disciplines, putting the idea of rehearsal at the heart of his practice. Deeply influenced by the specificity of the sites where he works, the architecture that houses them, the society, culture, and politics that constitute them. He investigates the parameters of proposal versus object, the mechanics of language, and the ambiguity of meaning and perceiving. Awarded Postmaster Architecture, Royal Institute of Art, Stockholm, MFA Fine Art, Oslo, National Academy of the Arts, MA Curating, Chelsea College of Art and Design, Fine Art Research and Production Programs, and Van Eyck Academy, Maastricht, and BA Fashion Design, Gerrit Rietveld Academy, Amsterdam. Please welcome Mr. Mosira in one moment.
Hello. Probably the content of this read introduction extracted from an official source. So it may be out of the context or ideologically biased. So before I start, let's test the audio quality first. Shall we?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clearly.
Test, test. I see the mirror. I get up. One more time. I see the mirror. I get up. I am absent. He is performing. Do you know, when I immigrated from the Soviet Union, I was looking for freedom that the world will offer me. I found life in Moscow hard. I was denied permission to lead the concerts. There were restrictions placed on repertoire. I couldn't play the music I want to play, which identical also happens today, now and again. Back in Soviet Union, the reason were ideological. Now, the commercial. Basically, no much difference. There is always pressure. I learned to live with the pressure. I don't give up. So I easily, when I believe it's something, violinist Godo Kramer relieves in January 22. Do you know that you have to subject the subject to activate the act of freedom of expression or the freedom of thought, which people seldom use? Art is an act of urgency that emerges in the state of emergency. Under Article 10 of the Human Rights Act 1998, everyone has the right to freedom of expression in the UK, but the law states that this freedom may be subjected to formalities, conditions, restrictions, or penalties as they prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society. Over the last 30 months, we have seen many of revealed assumptions about society, culture, and the economic unturned or broken. Eventually, we are inside a period of disruption that neither began nor will end with COVID-19 pandemic, and in which the largest social, economic, ecological crisis of our time become vivid and present. However, the institution of art could not recognize the emergence of these latent possibilities, which are provided by these unprecedented challenges to boost for rapid and transformative change due to its brain death. However, it's business as usual, forwarding the paralyzed schooling, practice, and promoting art policies. The institution of art has fell short of seizing this critical period to exercise a fundamental change in all aspects. The institution of art drags more and more in self-flattering of continuous executing of 18th century perspectives. If there were few doubts about the actual brain death of the institution and the paralyzed art practices since the end of Dadaism, the COVID-19 outbreak, the broken down these particles of doubt. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced COVID-19 has forced shutdown of all live events, exhibitions, travel, and public presentations. On the other hand, academia had altered and stuck to Zoom classes through uploading the same outdated materials, whereas the art venues adapting the drive-through exhibition, outdoor projecting images of their exhibits, and/or virtual viewing of collection, performances, and speeches. For example, a museum, Boijmans van Begen, and Rotterdam Aho have entered into a unique partnership, a drive-through exhibition from 1st of August to 23rd, 2020. You can drive your own car or borrowed electric car through Rotterdam Aho's 10,000 square meter hall and see more than 50 high-profile artworks from the collection of the museum. Today's art professionals derive solution from drive-through McDonald's, as contemporary people don't distinguish between junk food and the junk in museums, which is frankly demonstrating how societies become so ignorant to the act of seeing and perceiving. How radical is the ridiculous in contemporary society? Nevertheless, Italy's coronavirus lockdown didn't stop two girls from sharpening their tennis skills. They play a thrilling rooftop tennis rally, April 2020. Hence, I have to augment my virtual room for the following proposition to evolve so as no room for oppositional stance, even in Rome. How pots and pans become tools of protest from Chile to Myanmar. It was the calmer heart around the world at 8 p.m. Tuesday, February 4th, 2021. The banging of pots filled the air in Myanmar's largest city, residence of Yangon, the country's former capital, unleashed a volley of pan rattling, drum beating, and horn honking. A dissonant moment of dissent, a day after the military seized power in a coup. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you to set the alarm clock in your cell phone for 35 minutes ahead. So I stop before, at, or after the alarm gets off. I will stick on the scheduled presentation slot I was given, which is a bit less than the 45 minutes allegation that Mr. Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of UK, claimed Iraq could use weapons of mass destruction within 45 minutes, which ultimately led to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Nevertheless, it is not by coincidence that the former Labour Party leader became the richest ex-prime minister ever. I'm not one of the super rich, says Tony Blair, despite being worth £2,000 million a year and owning 6 homes. The Telegraph, 30 June 2012. Let's not to worry about statics. Capitalism is more important than democracy. The news is changing. The market is changing. Not today is ever the same. Everyone that's involved in our program needs to know what's happening. You get the option in a minute. The people appear in our show, watch our show. Welcome. What a day it was yesterday. What a day there is ahead of us. I am very excited to see all of you here. No show, but. No arena, but. No metaphors, but. No theater, but. No language, but. No joint, but. No art, but. No horizon, but. No style, but. No definition, but. No metaphors, but. No displacement, but. Nobody, but. No construction, but. No appearance, but. No function, but. No pragmatics, but. No craft, but. No consumption, but. No tradition, but. No history, but. No social, but. No bareness, but no invisible, but no material, but no skin, but no model, but no identity, but no gender, but no seduction, but no media, but no public, but no opportunities, but no formation, but nothing is what it seems. A rain dance is a ritual that attempts to create the condition necessary for good harvest, but doesn't itself produce the harvest. No translation is available in your area. Do you have anything you wish to say? Something to have before we begin? No, it is not a contest. The two of them with themselves. So don't play. So don't play it for real until it gets real. I won't keep you very long if you are in a hurry. In God they trust. In art, I don't. For God's sake, we just anchored on the shore of the third decade of the 21st century. And you are still talking about art, seeking to diagnose its contemporary dysfunctions. Do you know art is over in Europe? Since World War I, whatever was produced, artworks, papers, theses, essays, articles, books, and other publication has failed to immense contemporary art from the precepts of 18th century fine art. Duchamp had to resubmit Fontaine 1917 as a new art, ready-made. Thus, the Salon reassured his membership's resumption. The Fontaine was an art statement that outraged the Parisian Salon des Indépendants, in which Duchamp himself was a member. However, Duchamp and a like-minded lacked the courage and a vision to propose a roadmap to go beyond fine art perception. Rather, they were trapped into another repetitive formal practice that labeled ready-made. The institution of art, in practice, the establishment, contains any decent attempt that performs outside of its spectrum within. As Dada was the single strive to liberate artists from the outdated canons, as the Students movement 1968 was the single uprising to break with the suppressive nature of the ruling system in modern Western Europe. In either case, art and artists generally figure as antagonistically opposed to an institution that incorporates, co-opts, modifies, and otherwise misappropriates one's radical and institutionalized practices. These representations can admittedly be found in the text of critics associated with institutional critique. However, the idea that institutional critique opposes art to institution or supposes that radical artistic practices can or ever did exist outside of the institution of art before being institutionalized by museums is contradicted at every turn by the writings and work of Asher, Broders, Berner, and Haka. Andrea Forster reminds. Well, what do you know? The Salon des Refugees Art Exhibition 1863 wouldn't get held without the command of Napoleon III. The rejected artists and their friends protested, and the protest reached Emperor Napoleon III. The emperor's tastes in art were traditional, but he was also sensitive to public opinion. His office issued a statement, says, numerous complaints have come to the emperor on the subject of the works of art which were refused by the jury of the exhibition. His Majesty, wishing to let the public judge the legitimacy of these complaints, has decided that the works of art which were refused should be displayed in another part of the Palace of Industry. Thus, no individual voice will get heard, permitted without the blessing of the establishment. As long as the shows attract the crowds, the artist's fate is chained into the patron's hand. The status quo remains. Government, the Polish People's Republic, attempt in the early 1980s to destroy the Union solidarity through the imposition of martial law in Poland, and the use of political repression failed. Operating underground with significant financial support from the Vatican and the United States, established to be as much as $50 million. The Union survived, and by the late 1980s has entered into negotiation with the government. Eventually, a human history doesn't have a rule for disassociated unattended entity. Autonomous entity is a suspicious source of threat to all associational masses. Those opponents should be eradicated immediately. My father's cabinet maker workshop was sanctuary for me, where I could work and earn money to pay my bills. On the other hand, pleasing my father, who sees his son working alongside. Satisfying the client by providing good products. Get delighted by doing something has tangible values. My father had passed away. The workshop was sold due to the 12 years offensive, severe siege against Iraqi people, oil for food. Even pencils were restricted to export to Iraq with allegation of double usage in the production of a nuclear weapon. All those devastating wars and sieges have turned the country into ruin in the name of disseminating democracy. I love America. I hate democracy. According to my record, my submitted enormous and solicited proposals, applications for university courses, residency programs, fellowships, or grant got hardly approved, which is constituted rehearse on refusal, working strategy, a counter approach to the European lead siege against my illegal performance. Over the last 20 years, living mainly in Western Europe, a few applications were approved due to technical errors that occurred to the selection committee's legislation and scrutiny procedures, as it may happen to my application for this call too. In recent years, hardly a technical error occurs due to the institution have tightened the legislation and security procedures against oppositional stance. All these refusals are fueling for boosting my struggle against the topography of the institutional terror. I, the non-European, nor democratic by birth, possess nothing but thoughts that are made of tin, in contemporary word spams. They are anything but cool, hip, sexy, glamorous, or grandeur. Opposing the outdated Western European / Northern American dominated art canon and isms on Europe soil is the farthest that I can perform live. The self-claimed Western culture is an oppressive colonial policy against others' diversity. White supremacy is a self-ending per se, eliminates diversity to prevail the monoculturalism uniformity. Cherishing culture diversity has never been as urgent as it is now. Well, what do you know? People in Frieze Art Fair, London, spend 16 seconds to view artwork, while people spend 36 seconds to view commodity in the supermarket. Charles Jonks, critic and landscape architect, states in October 2011. At the other extreme, I have to stress that my performance is not a critiquing the institution of art. As you know, you can't explain pictures to a dead hair. Rather, everlasting exercise to sustain, to a certain extent, the planktonic intelligence and affections that are left through my strive against the inherited, contaminated conceptions and practices. Hence, I have to augment my virtual room for the following proposition to evolve as no room for opponent even in Rome. MC, how do you define revolution? DJ, I like the answer someone gave about P.nography. I don't need to define it. I know it when I see it. Isn't it funny how, in order to move closer toward a non-hierarchical world without objects, we still need to have the experience of the object first? Image making, consuming, and sharing as individuals made us as a stand partner in a broader creative act. Yet, there are still only a few who can make this feel like more than petty repetition. The pain-pleasure principle, suicidal desire, Catholic upbringing, all that. I get a little uneasy when you say these things and look around my living room. MC, not to worry, we will recreate object kind after the deluge. And instead of rocks, we will throw those literature group argent chairs behind us. Ladies and gentlemen, are you still interested in the program? The 2 years research and production program I had performed at the Jan van Eyck Academy Maastricht 2001 to 2002 was a substantial period to investigate the percepts of art practices, theories, present perceptions, and the politicization of art, the physicality of artwork and art gallery, invitation card, press release, opening hours, audience, etc. I had concluded that the institutionalized art is about executing things according to the well-known standards of subject matter, technique, and style, and signing the contract with the art institution patron, which contradicts art as an act that is controversial by nature and in opposition to the status quo, according to George Bataille. Maastricht, June 2002 till March 2003. Over 6 months, I was sending postcards every week to the Jan van Eyck mailing list, which included 55 addresses of artists, critics, historians, curators, journalists, museums, and art centers directors, etc. In addition to an Iraqi artist lives in the Netherlands, and myself for documentation. After 5 months, shockingly enough, I got a call from the Iraqi artist with a trembling voice says, two officers from the Dutch intelligence office, Avid, had just left after 2 hours of interrogating my wife and me. They told me that they had received 9 complaints from Belgium, Germany, Netherlands, and UK, about receiving suspicious postcards. They asked me if I have received such postcards, which I denied and said, I used to receive many advertisements and junk posts in my mailbox, which I threw most of them in the bin without looking at them. Then, in the middle of interrogation, one of the officers present a postcard that they took from my mailbox and repeated the question. Do you know who is sending these postcards to you? I denied that. So to protect you from any harm that it could happen, please bear in mind this artist had severe experience with Iraqi secret intelligence too, as many Iraqi people. The Avid has executed a foreseen scenario as I perceive the regime as inherently repressive. They differ in implementing policies according to the level of the security threats. Throughout the following weeks, the artist's phone and mailbox were under control. Outrageously, they opened his letters and left them in the mailbox. After a couple of weeks, the situation became unbearable to the artist and his family. Therefore, I had suggested to the artist that I am going to call him on his home phone, which was under control too, telling him about my entire project, including sending these postcards, which I didn't tell him beforehand, so to have his objective critique after I end the project. They were listening to our conversation and the issue was solved. Indeed, of the following day of the call, the two officers visited the artist for the fourth time and told him that the case now is closed. Was it? Imagine, after closing the case, I was recruited by the Dutch intelligence office, AVID, who they thought I will contribute to the philosophy and vision of this institute, instead of resuming my illegal performance in the Republic State of Art. Imagine I executed the conditional obligation that I was forced to sign on my release from the secret police station in Sera, Iraq, to become its civil agent, instead of moving to Kurdistan province to resume my secondary school, where non-Kurd is considered as suspicious regime spy. Since the age of 15, I dwelled in intellectual homelessness. Imagine I wrote an introduction letter to the Jan van Eyck Academy mailing list about my intention and my name about the sequences of postcards that I am going to send them over a period of 6 months. And a warn letter to the Dutch intelligence office so they avoid extra tax. Launching investigation for several weeks over suspicious postcards. Those how I could do a research about the outdated percepts of the institutionalized art, practices, and perceptions. How to prove that all regimes executing the same security measures when somebody dare to challenge their fragile status and false claims. If the world will survive the COVID-19, I probably won't survive World 21 or the coming version World 22. Imagine my existence is conditioned on comply with the set rules and regulations by all sorts of social groupings, forms that I had to deal with. Family, clan, tribe, kingdom, national state, institutions, etc. What particles of the inner necessity can withstand? However, the researcher in question was born with a river in his bucket and a bullet in another, which will trigger toward his head before his resistance gets fade. Am I in time? Hello? Am I still in time? It happened that he was sitting with his ex-girlfriend on Cafe Terrace in Edam, a small city in the Netherlands, which is known for its trademark cheese. While they were sitting and sipping coffee, suddenly they saw a man dropped off his bicycle to lift a movable bridge to let boats to go through. Then he released the bridge as soon as the other end of the bridge hit the land. The man jumped on his bicycle toward the next bridge. Lift, wait, release, and jump were exercised for the other 4 or 5 movable bridges. This portrays how he, the applicant, the speaker, works, walk, and thinks. In other words, performs illegally in contemporary realities. Apparently, he makes the audience worry, rather confused. He jumps from a subject to another, drops thought, rises another, moves an image and stills another, dismissed from an institution, clamps another, leaves a country and bridge another, defeated in a battle and launches another. There is no room even in Rome, he chants, in order to sustain resistance to the gravity of reality. Do you know, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. The NRA exclusive Vice President Ryan LaPierre Schutz. Who am I to discuss with you what I am instructed to do? What an imprint of a humanity to mount, whereas the imprints are already calibrated according to the rules and regulations. What text to forge, whereas the words are in the custody of the institution. Who am I to say to you what I am saying to you? Who am I to say to you about the true knowledge, as the knowledge in quarantine before thought and after the age refabricated the reason? As the truth is the light in the mouth of the ruler. Who am I to say to you if the task is only to repeat the given one simple message? Who am I to say to you if the wrong is the only deed I perform? Who am I to say to you if Islam is terrorist, I am licensed to? Who am I to say to you about dysfunctional societies? I am an alien who lives in a community that has nothing in common but shopping. The only thing that we have in common is shopping, Andre Garham Dixon reveals in Culture Show, BBC 2, April 2010. Who am I to say to you about this dysfunctionality in contemporary art? What you want to do in life is to remove anxiety. The way to remove anxiety is through acceptance, according to Jeff Koons. Who am I to say to you about art that is only emerged in times of conflict? Conflict is life, says Bate. Art povera was introduced in Italy during the period of upheaval at the end of the 1960s, when artists were taking a radical stance. Artists began attacking the values of established institutions of government, industry, and culture, and even questioning whether art as the personal expression of the individual still had an ethical reason to exist. At the other extreme, I am Netherlander. I am ignorant of your knowledge, despite human denials that Mars is the home of my thoughts, and I don't carry an identity to be synchronized by your categorization app. Your refusal to my present is the robust domain to rehearse upon. Reasoning my present in the age that has no reason to exist. Who am I to say to you what I am saying to you? I was not even a stone polished by water and become he. As it was by chance that I become a male, I am neither a dice player nor a poet betrayed by political slogans' shortcomings, but flittering with the sleepingless letters. I don't win as my wind storm in the wind. I lose my thoughts at the wind blowing. I'm like the others, or slightly different. I by chance saw the other side of the prevailed narrative. I exist. Therefore, I doubt the given narrative and challenge its inevitability. I could have not existed, as by chance I am here, as here is as there is a political exile. Exile is the only home I endeavor to comprehend, as earth is the state of complicity. Another confessional statement. He, the speaker, confesses that he has been contemplating something far more frightening than exile: conformity. Exile is the epic voyage of the damned. Duchamp saw himself confronted with a society that pursued the exploitative logic of capitalism, and therefore it dwelled in intellectual homelessness. According to Tate's definition, the term contemporary art is loosely used to refer to art of the present day and of the relatively recent past, of an inventory or avant-garde nature. Thus, how loosely is the loose usage of art contemporary? Dearmont, stop sending me such emails not related to ASP classes, because I will have to mark them as spam. Normal people do not have time to read such long and meaningless messages. Powell Jarnowski, Research Work Methodology Tutor, wrote in November 2020, who a year earlier structured the current PhD student. They label young researcher. Prepare slide shows us remember about one simple message rule. Point, elaborate, give example, repeat. What are you talking about? Why this is an issue? Who dealt with that and why? Give example and repeat. What are you talking about? Nevertheless, I am the wrong and the dominant right, says the researcher in question, as he always gets it wrong in his Wonder in Alice Land 2000. Despite all warnings, he has constantly been receiving from people, including his father, who appealed to him at his release from the secret police prison at the age of 15. You have a clay home. You can't fight the brutal autocratic regime. Thus, stop talking politics. Burn all the books you got, but focus on the school's books. So rescue yourself and us from the unbearable consequences. Father, it is not a political dispute. It is the consciousness that operates my performance. Father, do you remember when my teacher of history came to tell you that I had refused to fill in the affiliation form to the ruling Ba'ath Party when I was 9 years old? The teacher didn't report it to the high authority, either to the secret police, due to his sympathy and knowing you. However, he had noticed years later that his refusal was the cornerstone of the virtual room to build in years to come, to perceive his ethic whenever his virtual room gets eliminated by water cannons, contaminated by tear gas or sound bombs. He lay out anew as he resists to offer his skin as a banner for totalitarian regime's propaganda, as he resists to stretch his forehead for capitalism advertisement to light on. I am here is not a voluntary present, as there is the exile of the oppositional stance. I will be here and here again as long as exile resists authorized status. Test, test. I see the mirror. I get up. One more time. I see the mirror. I get up. I am absent. He is performing. His thoughts are the only things he has, which are made of tin. This is a story of words and images rather than guns, having an impact on the direction of contemporary statement. Perhaps this proposal doesn't win any vote, but with the fresh blood, try and scratch off the varnish. Everything has to be clear, new and transparent. Things are barely happened. I am he who I was or will be. So I stop here as the next speaker stands on her toes. So conference proceeds, so to speak.
Oh, good afternoon, good morning. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Sona. I'm gonna go ahead. I was planned to be the last one, but I think there is a technical issue. So my name is Julie Trébeau, and I am the director of the Artists at Risk Connection at PEN America. And it's my pleasure to speak with you this morning in New York and this afternoon on the other side of the Atlantic. So let me get started and share my screen with you.
Konnichiwa, pussies. I'm the lowbrow gag queen mangaka Rokude Nashiko. I wanted to make bigger pussies. The police saw this as evidence of so-called obscenity. July 12, 2014, I was arrested.
I was sentenced 5 years because of one of my songs, which was a mix of rock-style singing based on Quran verses.
Sexuality is a taboo. Anything there is sex involved, it makes people uncomfortable. Because of my work, I was getting threat from the religious extremists. I can get killed.
They push artists to censor themselves.
I just want to tell you that I'm not afraid.
So I hope you could hear properly the video. First of all, let me thank the organizer, the Cyprus Chamber of Fine Arts, and especially Rebecca Eftasiou for the invitation to speak at the conference. Today, I'm presenting on From Aesthetic to Action, how the world, the art world can support artists at risk. So as you can see, you have seen on this short video, artists play a critical role in society. When able to freely express themselves, artists stimulate innovation, promote dialogue, bear witness to inhumanity, articulate cultural critiques, and work with communities to affect change. In repressive society, art can offer an essential outlet for nurturing free thought and the exercise of free will, helping independent voices to survive, challenging orthodoxies in ways both subtle and overt, and creating opening that allow citizens to see a different future. But because of the power of their voices, many independent-minded artists faced intimidation, violence, censorship, legal harassments, resource denial, and other forms of persecution by both government and non-state actors. Ascendant authoritarian regimes, new and protracted conflict, and the rise of populist movement have emboldened effort to censor and suppress creative communities. These threats not only harm and constrain artists, but also lead to self-censorship and inhibition among others who witness the risk and harsh consequences of an unbridled expression. So, such realities have only been exacerbated over the past year. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic began, the rise of nationalist, authoritarian, and extremist regimes and conflicts around the world led to disturbing increases in violation of fundamental human rights. In response of these threats, massive social movements from Belarus to Myanmar to Cuba have arisen, generating hope for more equitable societies. But these movements have also led to ever greater dangers for activists, frontline workers, and outspoken voices. The health crisis has required retreat for many public spaces and cultural institutions, leading to financial hardship for cultural practitioners. Meanwhile, oppressive governments exploit the pandemic to crack down on dissent, while others fail to take necessary strides to protect the health of cultural actors. Beyond placing restriction on everyday life, from the shuttering of venue and public spaces to the shutdown of borders, authoritarian regime and declining democracy alike have curbed protests through enforced curfew, criminalized activism under the guise of vague laws meant to curtail disinformation, spreading disinformation about the virus, for example, and more. And yet, at the same time, to a degree not seen in decades, opposition movements are ascending, from protests of police brutality that swept the US in 2020 to massive demonstration rejecting the rigged presidential election in Belarus. Throughout this outpouring of dissent, artists have stood at the forefront, bearing witness to inhumanity and catalyzing solidarity through songs, slogans, and murals that call for change. But this power has also put artists at the forefront of backlash. Artists need and deserve greater support in recognition for their position at the frontier of free expression, exploring risky terrain, and making provocative ideas accessible and even safe for the rest of society to consider. So, the project I'm leading at PEN America was launched in 2017. So PEN America, just for you to know in case you're not aware of this organization, is the American chapter of PEN International. PEN International being the network of writers. It's a center, you have a center all over the world, more than 120 centers, and PEN America represent the US writer. We are a membership organization with over 7,000 members around the US, but also we are a free expression organization. And one of the projects we are leading at the free expression department is the Artist at Risk Connection. And the Artist at Risk Connection, it's an international collaboration platform of more than 100 organizations working to protect artistic freedom. So ARC, for the Artist at Risk Connection, works to deepen, expand, and improve the resources available to artists of all disciplines, as well as cultural professionals who face violence, harassment, and threats because of their creative work. As a network with both a regional and a global presence, ARC functions as a bulwark against crackdowns on creative expression, assist individual artists at risk, leverage global partnerships to bring international visibility to cases of repression, and raise awareness about artistic freedom. Through an easable, searchable online database of services, we play the role of connector and coordinator, matching need and response to equip artists to withstand pressure, continue to create, and secure tangible assistance as necessary. Since its inception in 2017, so we have assessed more than 286 individual artists and cultural professionals from over 61 countries by connecting them with the support that they need, meaning a wide range of services, most frequently including emergency fund, legal assistance, temporary location program, and fellowship. In 2020, the Artist at Risk Connection received more requests for assistance than any previous years, and global watchdogs documented over 700 incidents in at least 83 countries in which artists' rights were violated. Number that not include hundreds of cases that go unreported. While many artists defy these attacks and continue their work, others live in constant fear for their safety and the safety of their families, and some have been intimidated into self-censorship or just silence. So throughout ARC's existence, the number of requests for assistance from artists at risk we receive has continuously grown. While this growth is partially due to increased awareness of ARC's resource and its partners, we believe it is also rooted in the global rise of hostile regimes and groups that are exerting pressure on artistic freedom of expression, especially during the pandemic. Although artists from all over the world contact ARC for assistance, the majority come from a few region in particular, and I'm going to go to this detail. So year after year, the most requests, so 42% have come from the Middle East and North Africa, followed by artists from Africa, which represent 19% of our requests, then Latin America, 14%, and Asia, 11%, with other regions constituting the remaining 14%. Within this region, certain countries tend to have a higher rates of violation of artistic freedom than others. For example, While many countries have only 1 to 2 artists a year who reach out for support, ARC has received 36 requests for assistance from Iranian artists, nearly 14% of the total number of requests. Other high numbers come from Turkey, 19 requests, Egypt, 17, Cuba, 15, and Yemen, 11. So ARC receives the most requests from visual artists, a category that encompasses anyone working in a visual medium, including painter, filmmaker, and photographer. So over 62% of our breakdown in terms of discipline. So that indicates that visual artists are a substantially vulnerable field indeed of robust support. Over recent years, artists have been increasingly mainstream in international human rights framework, which is the good news. Organizations that traditionally thought to offer artists to human rights defenders, individual or group who act to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedom through peaceful means, have integrated artists into such communities they serve with greater and greater frequency. Such growth reflects the human rights world's burgeoning understanding of arts and culture as a vital human right, and cultural practitioner as key defender of those rights. Yet, despite the challenges artists face and their growing recognition by the human rights field, artists at risk find themselves exceedingly under-recognized and underprotected by their own community, the art world. An artist in trouble might naturally be inclined to turn to arts organizations for support. But the truth is that while there are numerous arts institutions around the world, the universe of those that serve artists at risk is dramatically small. While ARC's network of partners is not comprehensive, it aims to encompass the constellation of resources available to artists, and the makeup of its network is stunning. So, out of around 800 organization resources in a public and private database that we have on the website, and we'll put the link later on the chat, less than 10 are museum or museum-related organization or consortium of museum. Furthermore, only 100 organizations self-identify in our database as arts NGOs, and approximately 100 are artist residency open to host artists at risk. In total, this amounts to little more than 1/4 of ARC's network, which is instead largely comprised of human rights organizations and programs, university-led initiatives, governmental and international platform and mechanism, and the like. In fact, of the organization that self-identifies as arts and arts NGO or collectives, the majority are either grassroots programs with limited means, are not actually traditional and well-established art or institution. Though many of these NGOs do focus on defending artistic freedom especially, the field is very small, and many organizations are based in Europe and North America, despite the fact that the majority of artists request assistance from other regions. Artistic freedom NGOs that do reside in regions where most violations of artistic freedom occur often face capacity challenges and limitations based on financial and digital constraints, government regulation, and pressure from the civil society. So major art institutions such as museum, festival, foundation are woefully underrepresented in these efforts, despite their outsized resources and financial grounding. It is my view that one of the most fundamental dysfunctionalities in contemporary art today is a systematic failure to head and support artists at risk around the world. Many reasons contribute to an explanation for the contemporary visual art world's lack of attention to artists at risk. But in my view, much of it stems from the world's incredible ties to the market and its prioritization of aesthetic goal over anything else. In my experience, engaging traditional art institutions about the issue facing artists at risk around the world, the primary interest is the ability of the artist. In other words, contemporary art largely support, I will say, capital A artists and seem to not be as willing to support emerging artists or semi-professional artists in, like, say, Liberia or Bangladesh, without support conducting an aesthetic assessment of their merit and skill. The opposite should be true. If art organizations wish to actually take a stand and support artists at risk around the world, they ought to redirect the focus of their assessment to issue of risk. How vulnerable is an artist? How does our support of such an artist further artistic freedom and ultimately contribute to reduce risk for other similar artists in the future? Furthermore, 29% of ARC's requests have come from artists seeking to flee threats by relocating to a safer area, either temporarily within their country or region or long term. While countless artist residencies exist around the world, many of whom ARC work with, many still fail to create space in their platform to accommodate artists at risk, often being unwilling to integrate emergency review or pronounced need component into their vetting of applicants, and again relying instead of aesthetic evaluation to determine their residence. I believe that if well-established and traditional prestigious residency program but art institution, though that have the mean in other world, of which there are many, open up new resources, specific resources dedicated for artists in urgent need, the field will be drastically improved. And the tie with the art community for an artist be stronger and more meaningful. When art institutions have shown willingness to engage issues of artistic free expression and global human rights, it has often come in the form of curatorial dialogue and exhibition, but not tangible engagement with the vulnerable communities. After President Trump signed a Muslim ban, for instance, many art organizations here in the US show that conceive exhibition that engage issues related to the ban, such as border restriction, Muslim identity, US imperialism, and cross-cultural exchange. And yet, while such exhibitions are vital to raise awareness about the detriments of policy, like the Muslim ban on global arts and culture, they still fail to fundamentally address the challenges that face artists most impacted by such action. Useful examples of artistic disciplines that do support artists at risk exist. PEN International, PEN America, and their global PEN chapters are perhaps the most salient and older examples of a global support network that exists to both elevate and defend the literary arts. For years, PEN America has had a list of prominent writers and literary figures who are engaged with PEN mission and can be called upon en masse to join statements, call to action, petition, and more. And this is a very effective tool. In recent years, we opened letters to Iran calling for the freedom of human rights advocate Nasrin Sadattu to the Trump administration asking them to reconsider the Muslim ban, to Russia calling for the freedom of filmmaker Oleg Sentsov, with signatories including luminaries like Zadie Smith, Margaret Atwood, Nobel winners Orhan Pamuk, G.M. Coetzee, but also emerging writers. And in almost all cases, this influential coalition generates tangible change, from Oleg Sentsov freedom in 2019 to Nasreen medical furlough from prison this past November. Those are our example and our effective tool. In no case whatsoever have such signatories and literary professionals demanding an aesthetic evaluation of artists and writers before supporting them. The issue is not the artistic merit, but freedom of expression, and the belief that writers standing in solidarity with one another is vital to the continued flourishing of their art form. Similarly, the film world industry have begun to take strides to better advocate and defend filmmakers at risk. Human rights specific film festivals have proliferated around the world, which serve to elevate stories of human rights and of the filmmakers working in conflict zones. And many film festivals have shown willingness to engage in global advocacy, frequently joining us and other organizations on open letter, joint statement, and the like in defense of filmmakers at risk. Recently, the International Documentary Film Festival in Amsterdam, ITFA, the International Film Festival in Rotterdam, the European Film Academy launched the International Coalition for Filmmakers at Risk, which seeks specially to engage in advocacy and awareness raising for filmmakers at risk. These are film programs you could consider traditional in their fundamental programming and aesthetic roles, and yet they have shown a profound interest in supporting filmmakers who face persecution around the world. This is related to another dysfunctionality in the contemporary visual art world. Its lack of willingness to even take part in advocacy, one of the simpler yet most effective tools in the fight of human rights around the world. Major art institutions and museums taking the simple stride of adding their name to petition, joint statement, and upper letters regarding artists at risk will surely have profound impact on the field of artistic freedom, offering an unrivaled opportunity to leverage awareness around the cause of artists indeed, but above all, help this individual to be released or to continue their work, in a kind of safe and safe space and without those pressure. So it's crucial that the art world does not just show the work of artists engaged in social justice and human rights, but set a system protect those whose rights are infringed because of their art. In order to rectify these dysfunctionalities in contemporary art, I recommend that the art world take heed from the development in the literary and film worlds, exemplified by the Penn Center or ICFR, this coalition of filmmakers at risk. Art institutions and organizations, Biennale, Fair, galleries, collector, especially those major ones with high visibility and substantial funding, should take part in advocacy at least and stand in solidarity with artists at risk, regardless of artistic merit. Such solidarity need to even be active, not need not even be active, but could be passive. Art museum, for instance, could integrate advocacy in their communication, or publicity department by fielding requests to take part in joint statement or public campaign. It doesn't have to be so that upfront if they don't deem to do it. Likewise, organization and institution with the resources to do so should reallocate funding to develop programs that specifically support artists when they face danger, either by offering emergency grant or by undoing fellowship and residency program for vulnerable artists to relocate to safety and build the professional and international networks. Likewise, residency should more actively incorporate vacancies for artists in urgent need of relocation. I fully realize arts and culture have been hit tragically hard by the pandemic, and for many, such reallocation are just not feasible at the moment. But I do hope that they can become goals to work toward, and that organizations, large and small, will display their willingness to work towards systems that more meaningfully support artists at risk. Models to support artists do exist, and there are countless lessons the art world can have. An engaged, reciprocal coalition of creators and creative, like the one we have for Pen, has built and has proven to have transformative potential. And we believe something like this in the art world will be vital to help catalyze a movement of artists to stand in solidarity with and their imperial peers, creating a sense of camaraderie and kindship across artist community. With the resources at its disposal, the art world no longer has any excuse. It's time to stand up for persecuted artists around the world and help fight for a world where art can be made in peace. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry to say that I haven't seen most of it because we had a very big internet problem. The internet provider wasn't providing us with internet. Thankfully, everything is back on now. I will open the floor to our attendees if they would like to raise their hand or place a question in the Q&A box for Ms. Julie.
Katina has a question.
Yes, Katina, please go ahead.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to say that supporting artists is is complicated because there's always too much politics involved, even into that. Nothing is straightforward, and there's always this battle, and it depends who is behind that. And we've seen this again and again, and it seems like it's something that. Unfortunately, this valuable right of the humans to express themselves, the freedom to express themselves, it seems to be not to be respected, by even the governments or big companies or whoever is being affected negatively or thinking that they are affected in a negative way. It's sad to see that politics are always part of every expression.
it's I share your opinion, Katina, and I think that's the difficulties of my work, to be honest. Most of the support for persecuted artists are coming from the human rights world, as you could notice in my presentation. So there is a lot of work to do with the art world to at least generate solidarity. I mean, I really feel that the art and culture right now are facing such a decline, such a catastrophe because of the pandemic all around the world. It's really difficult to, engage in developing new resources because they are trying barely to survive right now. But still, I mean, artists around the world are still facing harsh persecution. The pandemic only exacerbated this situation. So I do think that there is a lot to do with the art world, at least to kind of raise awareness that artists are paying a really large tribute, when they are facing backlash, and they are facing more and more backlashes. And even in so-called democracy, we are seeing like a rapper in Spain currently in jail, Hungary, Poland, I'm mentioning only Europe because we tend to think, oh, it's only happening in the global south with very authoritarian regime and dictatorship, but it happened also in democracy. So I'm glad you have also this kind of the same sense of it's not an easy solution, definitely not.
Definitely, yes. And it's also, it happens unfortunately everywhere. But in democracy, is manipulated in a way that people are not so aware that they've been manipulated, where and exploited. Where in
it's
in
more
like
subtle. It's more
yes,
subtle
yes,
for sure.
it's
It's
more
more
subtle,
subtle.
and a lot of people don't even realize that this is happening. This is going on. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katina, for your question.
Anybody else would like to speak? Julie? Thank you very much, Julie.
Evaristo Parapoli. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Thank you. We're going to continue with our conference. Speaking with the director of the MA program and associate professor of arts administration of Florida State University, where he teaches doctoral and master's students. Mr. Antonio C. Kyler. He is the author of Access, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion: Insights from the Careers of Executive Opera Managers of Color in the US. We're going to play a video of Dr. Antonio's contribution because he had extreme difficulties also with connecting to the internet. It seems that today it's just not working. So we're going to continue with a video from Dr. Kyler.
Good afternoon, and welcome to my presentation today, Wielding the Power of Access, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to Achieve Creative Justice in the Creative Industry and Cultural Sector. My name is Dr. Antonio C. Kyler. I'm the director of the MA program and associate professor of arts administration at Florida State University. I'm also a visiting associate professor of theater and drama at the University of Michigan. Before I begin my presentation today, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm a proud descendant of the Mbundu people of Angola, the Jola people of Guinea-Bissau, the Kapele people of Liberia, the Mandikan people of Senegal, and the Mende and Temne people of Sierra Leone, who live full and rich lives before their iniquitous kidnapping, displacement, and enslavement on this land. I also acknowledge that I'm giving this presentation today in Tallahassee, Florida, where the Appalachian Nation, Muskogee Creek Nation, Miccosukee Tribe of Florida, and the Seminole Tribe of Florida stewarded the land. I pay respect to their elders, past and present, their descendants, to the generations yet unborn, and to all indigenous people. I see that this land remains scarred by the histories and ongoing legacies of settler colonial violence, dispossession, and removal. And connected in spite of this, And with tremendous resilience, these indigenous nations have remained deeply connected to their territories, families, communities, and cultural ways of life. And just to give you an overview of today's presentation, first I want to start with a provocation based on a quote by Audre Lorde. Then I'm going to describe and define creative justice for you. I'm going to also explain why creative justice is important, providing some examples and evidentiary support for my assertions, and then define access, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and their relationship to this creative justice conceptual model that I've developed. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the creative justice procedural model, which operationalizes the conceptual model that I'm going to talk about. And then I'll close with some discussion around how we as individuals and participants in the arts and cultural sector can use social responsibility to frame our actions in building creative justice. So in 1984, Audre Lorde said that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And I appreciate this quote because what Lorde is arguing here is that if we really want transformation in the creative industry and cultural sector, we can't use the very same tools that we have used to create the cultural sector. We have to do something very differently. And a good example of that is here in the US, after the viral killing of George Floyd, several companies, corporations, institutions, individuals, funding agencies pledged to give about $1 billion, anywhere from $1 billion to $6 billion to fight racial injustice. Now, given that capitalism and money have been tools of the master, one has to question whether money will actually fix the problems that we are experiencing today as it relates to creative justice. And so my provocation for you today as you listen to this presentation is to consider the question, is the cultural sector, is the creative industry a tool of the master? So creative justice. In 2017, the author Mark Banks conceptualized and coined this term creative justice in his book, Creative Justice, Cultural Industries, Work and Inequality. He says that creative justice is both a descriptive account and a normative aspiration. And he uses 3 pillars to form his definition of creative justice. He uses objective respect, parity of participation, and the reduction of harms. In my view, objective respect, parity of participation, and reduction of harm parallels what we use in the US as access, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And later in the day's presentation, I'll explain how. But riffing off of Mark Banks, I want to share with you that I started defining creative justice, and particularly as I'm contextualizing it in the US cultural sector as the manifestation of all people living creative and expressive lives on their own terms. However, my recent research and thoughts about this topic and the definition of creative justice, I've refined them to precisely describe more pointedly that creative justice for me is the manifestation of all historically discriminated against, marginalized, oppressed, and subjugated peoples living creative and expressive lives on their own terms. And I've done this specifically because those people who are privileged by specific social identities and advantaged by those social identities are already living creative and expressive lives on their own terms. And so creative justice really is about ensuring that those who have been marginalized and oppressed and subjugated in all kinds of societies also get to experience creative and expressive lives. It is, for me, a tremendous and basic human right. However, the reason why we need creative justice in the first place is because across multiple cultural contexts and societies, people have been marginalized and oppressed based on specific social identities. For example, here in the matrix of oppression and privilege, you can see that there are 7 social identities that privilege or oppress specific groups and lead to specific isms or privileges. So for example, in the case of ability, we see that the temporarily able-bodied are privileged by ability. And those who are differently abled or disabled are oppressed by having a different ability or a disability. This leads to what we call ableism or able-bodied privilege. And the remedy for ableism is to become anti-ableist. With age and gender function in two very particular kinds of ways. And so age actually cuts both ways for adults and young people, right? And so elderly people and young people can both be privileged and oppressed by age, leading to what is adultism or ageism, and that is adult or youth privilege. And so the remedy for adultism and ageism is anti-adultism and anti-ageism. When it comes to class, wealthy people are privileged by their class, and the working class people or working class poor are oppressed by class, which leads to classism and class privilege. The remedy for for this ism is anti-classism. As I said earlier, with gender, male and cisgendered people are privileged by gender. And so female, gender nonconforming, and trans people are oppressed by gender. And it leads to sexism or cisgenderism and male privilege or cisgender privilege. And so the remedy, of course, is anti-cisgenderism and anti-sexism. With race, white people, people of European descent are privileged, and Black, Indigenous, and people of color are oppressed by race, leading to racism and white privilege. And so the remedy is anti-racism, which is something that we've heard a lot about since the viral killing of George Floyd. With religion, Christians are privileged, and agnostics, atheists, Hindus, Jews, and Muslims are oppressed because of the dominant number of people in our societies, in our world, who identify as Christian. Religious oppression is the resulting ism, and Christian privilege is the resulting privilege. And so therefore, the remedy to religious oppression is anti-religious oppression. Lastly, sexual orientation privileges heterosexuals, while it oppresses bi, gay, lesbian, queer, same-gender loving, plus identifying people, leading to heterosexism and heterosexual privilege, and anti-heterosexual is the remedy. Overall, anti-oppression is the remedy for all of these forms of oppression that show up in our society. And as evidence of this, particularly in the US, here are some examples of the ways in which people have been marginalized and oppressed in the US creative industry or cultural sector based on specific social identities. And so we see that, for example, Disney was hit with the gender pay gap class action suit. The Metropolitan Opera's new gay director is only big news because of the Met's press long complicity with the closet. Black theater workers after George Floyd, and Black cultural workers in multiple cultural forms started speaking out against the racism that they experienced in the cultural sector. And so there's evidence that support my assertion that marginalization and oppression exists in our societies, but also in the creative industry and the cultural sector. And creative justice, in my view, is a way to respond to this. And so the first pillar or construct that relates to creative justice, in my view, is access. And I define access as removal of all barriers to participation. Right? And these barriers can be perceptual, they can be physical, they can be psychological. And so what we must do as creative and cultural sector workers is identify all barriers that prevent people from actively and proactively pursuing and participating in arts and creative activities. To remove those barriers so that we increase the likelihood that all people can have equal and equitable access to arts and culture and the transformative experiences that participating in arts and culture yields. Secondly, I define diversity as a qualitative or quantitative assessment of human difference. However, Loden goes on to say that diversity is human differences that can lead to tension if they're misunderstood. She also says that there are primary dimensions of diversity, which are at the center here and include age, sexual orientation, ethnicity, race, gender, physical abilities. And there are also secondary dimensions of diversity, which includes appearance, political ideology, marital status, functional specialty, military experience, and so on. Now, what we have done in the past here in the US specifically is have, assessments of human difference in the arts management workforce or among artists and such, but we have not done a qualitative assessment to find out about intersectional marginalization. So for example, if someone identifies as Black and female, and the compounding impacts of having intersectional marginalization on people's lives, right? And that's something that we need to start doing as a way of figuring out what we need to do to create equitable and inclusive cultural spaces for people to participate in actively. The third aspect of this conceptual framework that I am articulating for you is equity. Now, the two images here on this slide demonstrate for you that equality and equity are not the same. And in equality, everyone gets the same intervention for success, right? And so what you see here is one individual who received a box to stand on who really didn't even need it because he could still see over the fence to watch the soccer game that is being played, right? And then the two other folks who received the box, one of them still needs, more assistance to see as clearly as is possible. And the third individual received the box when a box was really not useful for them at all. In the second image here, where equity is being pursued, you see that the tallest individual gives the person their box so that this individual now can look and see and watch the game freely. And then the person who's in the wheelchair, because they have a ramp, they can roll up the ramp and see the game equitably. And so therefore, we have assessed the specific interventions each of these individuals need so that they can easily see the game and enjoy the game being played here. So that's the difference between equality and equity. And the last construct that is a pillar of this conceptual model that I'm describing for you is inclusion, which really means belonging, right? And I love the quote here that says, "I wish I knew where I belong." So in the conceptual model that I'm describing for you here, access plus diversity plus equity plus inclusion leads to creative justice. And again, as a reminder, creative justice is the manifestation of all historically discriminated against, marginalized, oppressed, and subjugated peoples living creative and expressive lives on their own terms. But this is just a conceptual model or theoretical model for helping you to understand the roles access, diversity, equity, and inclusion play in achieving creative justice. And another way that you can think about it is that access, diversity, equity, and inclusion are short-term goals to get to the long-term goal of creative justice. Now, to operationalize this conceptual model, I have come up with a visual model that articulates a stairwell, if you will, and places access at the bottom of the stairwell and the foundational stair towards creative justice. And one of the ways that you can think about this particular procedural model is if you think about the most discriminated against, marginalized, oppressed, or subjugated group of people in your particular society, when they come to the cultural sector or the creative industry, and you can think about it from the standpoint of access. Does that group of people have access? And if they don't, why don't they have access? And why haven't we given them access? And then as you move up a stair, you have diversity here. Now, when you're doing an assessment, whether it's qualitative or quantitative of diversity, and you're trying to find out how much human difference do we have represented here in our creative workforce, in our creative industry, our cultural sector, that assessment will tell you then that who doesn't have access and what might need to happen to ensure that that group of people have access to participate in the creative industry and the cultural sector. The next stairwell after access and diversity is equity. So once we have given everyone access and we have a really good representation of all human difference represented in our creative industry, then we can begin having a discussion about equity. Because remind you now, just because a group of people are marginalized and they share the experience of marginalization does not mean that they're all the same. There's still difference and diversity in that group of folks. And so those individuals will need different interventions for their success. Once we've achieved access, diversity, and equity, then we can have a conversation about inclusion, which is the last stairwell before we get to the top of the stairwell and get to creative justice, which again is the manifestation of all historically discriminated against, marginalized, oppressed, and subjugated peoples living creative and expressive lives on their own terms. As you're further operationalizing the creative justice procedural model, there are 4 key questions to ask yourself. First, who has and does not have access to participate in the cultural sector as artists, audience members, boards, through programming or staff? And second, how diverse are artists, audiences, boards, programming, and staff? Third, what policies and practices has the creative industry or cultural sector used to ensure equity among artists, audiences, boards, programming, and staff? Lastly, by what means has the cultural sector or creative industry cultivated inclusive spaces for artists, audiences, boards, programming, and staff? Previously, I described what could be an organizational reconceptualizing or reconfiguring of how to use access, diversity, equity, and inclusion to achieve creative justice from an organizational standpoint. But we must also keep in mind that there are individuals functioning in organizations that are perpetuating systems that could be harmful or that are disrupting systems to create transformation. And so remember, in my view, individuals allow and imbue systems with power so that they function in the ways that they have maintained the status quo or perpetuated white supremacy or male supremacy or heterosexual supremacy. And so individuals must also take responsibility and also play a role in making this change. And what I really appreciate about Keller's social responsibility of arts managers is that there's a call to action in the 7 principles. What he described as ways in which arts managers can participate in manifesting social responsibility in the creative industry and cultural sector. And he first says that arts managers must actively participate in the liberation of the culturally disenfranchised. When I ask you to envision the most marginalized or subjugated or discriminated against group of people in your society, I did so because I want you to think about your role in helping to liberate the culturally disenfranchised. Secondly, Keller says that arts managers must support and pursue opportunities for decentralized cultural policy. Third, he says that arts managers must encourage the broad-based decision-making and pluralistic distribution mechanisms in financing cultural activities. Fourth, Keller argued that arts managers must dedicate a significant period of the work week studying the system in order to sharpen understanding of the social political environment, and I would argue figuring out ways to disrupt the system to change it. Number 5, arts managers must publicly urge the creation and periodic update of a comprehensive and community cultural assessment. Number 6, arts managers must support activism in communities where past exclusionary social patterns have established cultural inequities. And one of the ways that we see this show up in the creative and cultural industry is in funding, right? You know, those legacy cultural organizations that primarily produce, present, or exhibit Western European culture over the other cultures, whether they be Black, Indigenous, or of color. We see that this happens a lot over and over again. And so arts managers hold the power, they will the power to change that. Lastly, Keller argued that arts managers must maintain an awareness of monopolies in the nonprofit sector while seeking to develop compensatory responses to barriers of public entry. And so as individuals, I would like to challenge you to figure out how you can adopt these 7 principles and use them in your work to create space for the most historically discriminated against, marginalized, oppressed, and subjugated peoples in your cultural context and society. Lastly, I close with that question again, is the cultural sector a tool of the master? My answer is, it doesn't have to be. Thank you. I look forward to your questions and providing answers in our live session later this month.
Hello, my name is Katina Costa and I'm the president of Bagade. It seems like we have some kind of an internet problem again, but I can continue to end up the our conference. What I'd like to do firstly is to thank you all for joining this conference in times in conflict. Dysfunctionalities in contemporary art has been an ongoing program that explores issues that have an impact on creative process, artistic welfare, and artist culture in general. The program evolved to be an umbrella and a platform of communication, hosting activities and conferences that aim to discuss those particular circumstances that influence or and are problematic for the art and the artist, the art market, models of education, sponsors, political conflicts, states, culture, politics. All of these are issues that affect artistic creativity. Being the president of EGADE, and I'm quite involved, that means I'm quite involved in the politics, in the cultural politics. And this is where I'd like to stand and talk about those issues. Bring your attention to issues that artists here are facing. Do you know that our government in Cyprus has not approved the Chamber of Fine Arts as a legal entity under public law? Do you know that artistic profession in Cyprus has not been yet registered by social services and social security? Do you know that there is no legislation for pension or other benefits for the artist? Do you know that Cypriot artists have to be living, are forced to be living separately due to the division of our island in 1974? Do you know that the only legislation that we managed to actually in place is not being implemented? And I'm talking about the law of the 1%, which is the enrichment of buildings with artworks with the minimum of the cost, which is the 1%. And do you know that our museums and galleries are still closed on the weekends? These are dysfunctionalities that they sound even primitive and very fundamental. And our state, that goes to show actually that our state policies are highly problematic. Our cultural services are underfunded and understaffed. We often are said that, but when there is no cultural ministry, we don't have anywhere actually to turn to. It's very important for artists to be united in order to have a stronger voice. We are faced with dismission, and often we're not respected enough by states. Therefore, artistic unions need to be alert and need to be in place. I am not sure how to end my introduction because I really needed to bring awareness to what is happening and all the issues that we have here. But I hope that this conference will become the reference point and the platform that is aimed to be, so we can share our experiences. I'd like to thank EGADE for giving me this opportunity to put forward and realize this idea for the conference. I'd like to say a warm thank you to the speakers for sharing their thoughts. It was very enlightening and interesting. And I'd like to also thank all the people that they work behind the scenes to make this happen. I'd like to thank Rebecca for all her good work. And I also like to thank the social, the cultural services for being the main sponsors for this event. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry for the issue we're having with the internet, and our conference, it will be online on the website of EGADE as well as on YouTube. Thank you very much.